Welcome to the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. Today I want to elevate my third entry into the binder of fame. And that's just in the order that I'm going in. Obviously, any one of these deserves to be in, but this is one that I really wanted to get in early for two reasons. One, because it really did reshape the whole space of cards. And I'm talking about 1988 Score Baseball, the set, the release. It really did reshape cards, period, but also it very much captures the spirit of the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame, which is not about famous cards. It's about the influence into the card industry and what really is iconic and meaningful to the card industry. So it's both famous cards and it's technology, sets, ideas, concepts that defined cards as we moved forward. And really nothing is as influential in the evolution of cards as 88 Score. You could make a case for 1990 Pro Set. That's about the only place you're going to find something that was as influential in reshaping cards moving forward. But it's, I think it's very easy to put Score here ahead of Pro Set for many different reasons, including the fact that Pro Set was following in the heels of 1988 Score. But Score really did reshape cards, period, just the way that we thought of cards. And it's something we don't tend to think about very much because, well, 88 Score doesn't have any famous cards in it. Nobody cares about the cards. They look bland and dull, and that's more because of the printing technology than it is because of the innovations of the cards, the things that they were doing with the cards. So, the cards themselves, while they weren't as cutting edge in terms of how they were presented, what they did for the hobby is truly unmatched. And it came from a company called Sportflix. Well, Sportflix was the first iteration of trying to make professional cards. And the cards were done in a way that was, they were a novelty. That's basically what happened. But when that didn't really catch on, then the company decided they needed to make a more traditional card, but they still needed to make a card that was distinct, that was strong, that was edgy, something that was very different from the other cards, because the competition was, well, why buy this product versus any of the others? And what they created in 88 Score was a truly different card. It was a truly modern card. That's what Score was. It was the first true modern card. Now, we were already pretty much out of the vintage era of collecting, but that was the world of cards. The vintage era of cards was the spirit of cards, but not about the construction of cards. The truth is, vintage card construction continued through 1991. Even after Score, Topps, Fleer, and Don Russ, they continued to make vintage cards for another near half decade. And that was what Score needed to solve. It needed to change from the way that cards had always been to the way cards needed to now be. And as they did that, they laid out, like I said, they laid out a template for the future. So if you looked at cards in 1985, Sportflix wasn't out yet. So if you look at cards in 1985, they're not that different from cards in the 1880s. And the thing is that the card stock was very similar. It wasn't identical, but it was very similar. It was cardboard. That's what it was. It was cardboard with an image on the front, text on the back. Okay, the size was a bit different. The images were full color and much better on the card front. That's just kind of the way that the cards were. But for the most part, the cards in the 1800s were very similar to the cards in the 1980s. There just hadn't been much of a change. Those changes that were made were very much an overrated affair due to the fact that, look, they were great for card collecting in that space, but it was still the same cards. They just kept making the same cards. And when Score came out with a different card stock that just felt different, everything about the card stock was different, there was a big pushback in the card community in 1988 as people were saying, but that's not a card, that's not real, that's not true. And look, Fleer and Don Russ had already made a half step away, and that was accepted, so you should expect that there'd be a really good embracing of the 88 Score cardstock. But the thing is, the hobby just wasn't ready for that big of a change because it really did feel like it was abandoning everything that had been before. Score was solving a problem, but it didn't need to solve the problem. Was the problem solved? Was the problem enough of a concern to have a solution to it? And so let's take a second and look at the problem that was being solved. What was wrong with the 1987 release of cards? And we start off with Topps. Now, Topps, well, this is one of the great Topps cards, period. It's got great wood grain, the best wood grain on any card. That's just, there's no discussion about that. Gorgeous looking card, splash of color. Okay, this is a card that didn't need to be solved. Then we shift over to Fleer, and where Topps was always the traditional card, the new idea for the card every single year, Fleer tried to be the clean cut, really well polished card, the smooth operator of all of the card companies. And here in 1987, they had the blue fade down to the white, which is, it's not the best design they had, but still a really clean, nice looking card. Then we shift over to Don Russ, and well, Don Russ was always the edgy company. They were out there doing really bold, flashy stuff. And here they had, okay, the black border. I mean, hardly ever did they do black borders, and I don't know why. And then you have the lines coming off in the middle. I mean, just, okay, this card is great. So it begs the question, all right, well, what are we solving? Well, let's turn those cards over now, and let's look at the back. And when you look at the back, you suddenly see that, well, okay, so what's the problem? Well, with Topps, you have, okay, really nice traditional card, looks good, all the information you need, very nice. Go over to Fleer, and all right, Fleer has a different orientation and has kind of like theming on the card back. Things are broken into different places, so it has a really good layout to it. And then with Don Russ, it's, okay, Don Russ, I don't know what was going on with their card backs. They just kept churning out the same thing every year. It was ugly. That one needed to be solved. But otherwise, what was wrong with these cards? What was missing? Well, what was missing was an image. And the reason that they didn't have images on the card back was because the stock that they were using, which was cardboard. And even in the case of Fleer and Don Russ, it was closer to note card type card backs. Not quite, but closer. But the thing is, it was still papery, and you just couldn't print well. In fact, Fleer had even tried to print cards, or print images on the back of their cards, and they gave up because you couldn't get fine detail. So what you needed was very simple text that was easy to read. You didn't have too many colors. Don't get too much in there. The paperiness of Fleer and Don Russ didn't work, but with Topps, oh man, I mean, you could see the grain of the cardboard, for crying out loud. And so that was always a limitation that the cards had. And so now when we go back to the card front, look at these card fronts, what might you notice? Well, they're all basically portraits. So when we shift over to Score, now on that card back, they have a ton of information crammed in. It's really intended largely for kids, so you can get the text real small and they can read it. But the color theming provides a really good array of distribution around the card back. You can see where everything is. It has a liveliness to it. But it's those images. Nothing was more important to the influence of all cards than that image on the back, because now you have a really good shot of the player on the back so you know what he looks like. You flip around to the card front, you may not even see the player on it. It's all about the action shot. That's what Score brought, the reshaped cards, because now the cards could bring the vibrance and the energy and the excitement of the game right there on the card. You didn't have to worry about seeing the player. So let's go over to football for a second, because with baseball, you can get away with an action portrait. In basketball, it's a lot easier. Hockey, not so much. But in football, here are three cards, regular release cards of players. Now, in the same set, they also had these three cards, it gave you the ability to enjoy the action component to the player's existence as a player. But they had to do it separately because you can't see the player in these shots. And so that was a really big aspect of the sports card world, the hobby. The way that it worked was that you just were used to every card is a portrait on the front. Score now said, no, we're not going to bother with that. We're going to put the portrait on the back, and we're going to have action shots on the front. And it was hugely important, especially in football, because in football, Topps just churned out the same card every single year. Now, Pro Set comes in, and Pro Set's whole foundation was great images. That was what they were able to do so well. And even though in 1990, a lot of the shots really were portrait-like shots, they were doing it in a very different way because they had the freedom of choosing the best images. And that's what ended up with cards moving forward, was you thought of cards related to the sport, related to the team, related to the best image to convey what you wanted to do. So with Pro Set, obviously it was a mugshot on the back and a great action shot on the front. With Upper Deck, they were able to put a great action shot on the front, portrait on the back, or they flipped it around because they had the room on the back to put the action shot, wherever. But you had the ability to have the action shot somewhere and really have fun with these cards. And everybody did that within reason. But the reality was it was a slow churn for the main companies. And the reason that the big three didn't make a change for a while was because you make these kinds of changes when you have to, when you've got to earn your keep. And so for a new company like Upper Deck or Pro Set or Score, Action Packed, when you're coming in the door and you're trying to earn your audience, you got to earn your audience. But for the big three, they couldn't sell cards fast enough, quite literally. This was heading into the height of the junk wax era. And these companies had to keep ordering additional cards and keep upping and upping the stock in shelves because we were buying them so fast, they kept running out. Why would you invest in cards if you can't keep your own supply fast enough? You've got to create more cards to sell because you literally can't sell enough cards. That was what was going on. So of course they weren't going to be making any changes. And that actually leads to something I'll get to in a minute. But so with the cardstock, that was something that the new companies had to do in order to earn their audience. The older companies didn't bother. Score also used obnoxiously bright colors that just overpowered the entire card. They would refine this in '89 and especially in 1990 and do a much better job. But again, the card is not well enough crafted to show off what it was doing. And with those, the big thing about the color on the card front is the fact that it broke the set up. So prior to this, when you were a collector, especially in like the 70s, you just bought the packs, you put together the set, and you moved on. It's the new year, you buy the new cards, you put together the new set, and you move on. Some people might try to get a little bit more fancy with it and get the best versions of all the cards, but for the most part, you just did, it was a rote process. But as we headed into the 80s, now there was a lot of stuff to put together, and as you were putting together these sets, now it started to have more of a monolithic feel. Because these were sets were 660, or in the case of Topps, 792 cards. That's immense. That is a huge set. And it takes a long time to put it together. So as you're putting together this huge set, all the borders are the same, which means that it looks like one big block of cards, and it's pretty daunting. And it can take a lot of the spirit away as you're trying to finally put the cards together. Well, Score decided, you know what, we don't need to do that. And so they broke the set up into smaller groups so that even though it was still a 660 card set, it didn't feel like it. It was 110, 110, 110. And as you were going through and building the set, it felt like an attainable achievement because you saw smaller portions of it. And you thought of the set in smaller portions. So the whole nature of how you were thinking about card sets was different. And while Upper Deck would definitely come in with one big monolithic entity right from the outset, and Leaf wouldn't be making much change, it was different when you looked at, say, Pro Set. And in 1989, Pro Set used the same idea as Score, but they speckled them around, so the whole set was constantly varying. With NBA Hoops, when they came in, they had a whole white card back. And that just got out of the way and allowed the image to pop right out. But all the detail work on the card, well, that was a team color. So that meant that as you went through the card set, everything was team-oriented. You didn't feel like it was this big white card set. Instead, you were focusing on this is this team, that team, this team, that team. The whole card was built to have that feel. Topps used to have a little bit of it, like on this sheet behind me. You can see all the teams that pop out, but pop out is pretty relative because the border was overpowering. With NBA Hoops, they got rid of that so that the team was coming through. They wanted to theme it that way. And with Pro Set in 1990, well, they just went with the whole card border was each team's color. And that meant that the whole set now looked like the league. So this breaking up of the card set was something that was needed to happen because as we were getting more and more cards and it was harder and harder to pursue the sets, you couldn't really bother with these big monolithic sets where everything looked the same. You needed to break them up and shrink them. And as we got into 92 and 93, they weren't even selling card sets that were 600 cards. If you wanted a 660 card set, you bought a 330 card Series 1 and then a 330 card Series 2. That's how you built your sets. So the card sets in packs were usually 330, 400 cards, about that size. The whole sizing of the hobby was shifting in order to make it more attainable and more relative. Score was at the front end of doing that and setting out a new template for how to think about laying out your cards and presenting the cards in the set. And then another thing, something that's attributed to Score, but it wasn't actually Score, was the polywrap wrappers. These wrappers that were basically tamper resistant. Now, this was a quality control issue that did definitely need to be solved. It was actually released in Sportflix. That's where they started, but again, that was a novelty. Score, however, came out and said this is just a standard card, and this is a standard card wrapper. NBA Hoops used that in '89. Pro Set used that in '89. Upper Deck did their paper wrappers, which, again, you can't reseal those suckers. And it wasn't like Score and Sportflix invented this because, well, look, a rack pack, that's literally what it is. A cello pack is tough to reseal, but you can do it. Wax packs are easy. Rack packs? Well, no. Rack packs, you can't do that. And so Topps was already making tamper-resistant card wrapper or card packs, but it wasn't a big deal because, again, they couldn't sell enough cards. And so those wax wrappers were the easiest ones to do, and people didn't care. They were still buying them in bulk. Now, if you happen to get a Frank Thomas rookie card or a Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card, which happened to be next to the wax, well, sucks to be you. But again, we weren't changing our habits with what we were buying. That was something that other companies were going to need to do, and those companies were. And so moving forward, because Score was doing it, everybody in the future did exactly that. And even though Donruss and Fleer and Topps kept using wax wrappers, the whole rest of the hobby just flat out moved on. And because they moved on, eventually the big three had to catch up. This was the inauguration of that. So, big influences in the hobby. And it was done simply because Score laid out a new line in the sand and said, this is what everybody will be doing, and everybody did. And that was critical for the hobby. Somebody needed to do that and walk through that door. And this was the card set that did that. So you can look at 52 Topps, which it basically laid out a standard template for companies to follow, but Bowman didn't follow it. It was just attrition, the fact that Topps eventually became the only card company that had an impact. So, it's nice. It's an important benchmark in the history of cards. And Upper Deck had an influence, but they didn't reshape the hobby. 88 Score did. And that is critical to the evolution of cards. This was day one of true modern cards. The hobby may have moved past the vintage era, but the cards hadn't. Now they had. This is where it began. So for me, this is absolutely one of the most important entries into the Binder of Fame because, it truly reshaped the card hobby. So if you haven't experienced this channel much, definitely look around at the various stories of cardboard that I tell and about the entries that I make into the Binder of Fame. Explore these stories because this is the history of cards. That's what I'm trying to tell here, and in various different facets. And if you like the videos and what I'm doing here, definitely subscribe and make sure that you ring the notification bell so that you see when these videos come up, which is basically usually once per week. So it's not like a big burden on your time. So definitely do explore around. And I want to thank you for watching. So yeah, thank you.